Hello everyone, my name is CD, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a video of me trying out watercolor pencils for the first time ever. These are the Faber Castel brand watercolor pencils. If you're not familiar with this brand, they're a famous art brand based in Germany. If you're an artist and you've looked up art supplies before, you might have heard of these. You might have heard of this company. Now, those who have watched my time-lapse videos before know that I use color pencils, and I've been practicing using color pencils for a very long time. I started using them as a kid, obviously. Didn't like them very much, but when I got serious with my art over 5 years ago or so and started to really dive into color pencils, it became one of my favorite mediums to use. It's very satisfying. It's slow, but it's a slow medium, but it actually is one of the things that helped me to be a more patient artist and a bit of a more patient person as well. Now, I bought these watercolor pencils a long time ago. I actually don't remember when I got them. I'd say probably around 2022 and 23, which is kind of around the time where I was really focused on digital art, especially around 2023, where most of my art was specifically and exclusively digital. So I had the watercolor pencils put away for quite some time. And here we are in 2025, and I'm finally getting around to using them. The first thing I did was swatch the colors, and then after I finished swatching, I went over the colors with a water brush. Now, I actually didn't have a watercolor brush on me, but I did have a water brush from a watercolor marker set from Ohuhu that I had. So I figured it should work, and turns out it actually did. Now, while I was swatching these color pencils, I did notice a slight problem, because for the picture that I was going to color, it didn't really have any of the colors that I was looking for in the set. Specifically for the skin tone of the girl in the picture that you see, which is not at the fault of the 36 pencil set that I ended up getting. I knew going in that by getting the 36 pencil set that I was most likely going to be missing out on some essentials that I might use the most, or at least might want to use. So I tried something else. I tried to use regular color pencils to color her skin. That didn't really work out the best because the color pencil brand that I used were the Blick Studio color pencils, which are not really the best feeling color pencils to use, especially after trying out Prismacolor color pencils, which is what I should have been using in the first place. But aside from the pencils themselves, I was trying to use regular color pencils on watercolor paper, so that might have added to the challenge as well. I must admit I probably got a little bit lazy halfway through trying to color her skin. At some point I was really starting to regret even getting these pencils out to color her skin. I should have, at some point I realized that I should have grabbed my markers, the watercolor markers that I mentioned earlier in the video, and just use those to color her skin instead. That is one option. Another option would be to just use whatever comes in the set. Just stick with what you have in the moment and worry about what you don't have later on. You may not have what you want, but there are just times where you have to be thankful and appreciate what you do have. And with art, that's no exception. The regular color pencils just did not feel good to use on watercolor paper. So I left the skin as is and just moved on to the hair. And this is where I decided to finally use the watercolor pencils. The first thing I did was color the hair with a really thin layer of the watercolor pencil. It was a brown sort of color, like a light brown, I believe. This actually took me a while to just fill in the hair with a thin layer, which obviously it would take long to do because, well, for one thing, it's long hair. It's long hair on a black woman, or to be more specific, long, natural, curly hair on a black woman. So considering that I am using color pencils, or in this case watercolor pencils, to color afro-based hair, long afro-based hair, it is going to take a while to do that. It's going to take a while to fill in the hair with just one layer. And also, of course, I had to sharpen my pencil probably a couple of times. Which, by the way, I actually worked on this picture last Friday and Saturday. Friday night I worked on the skin, and Saturday morning I worked on everything else. So once I filled in the hair with the first layer, I grabbed my watercolor brush, again from my watercolor marker set, and started going over the watercolor pencil with water. It was at this point where I was starting to question how this was even possible. It was absolutely fascinating seeing the water break down the grain of the color pencil. To be honest, I could have just left the hair as it was after I broke down the grain with the watercolor brush, because just looking at this video playback, it looks really good as is. However, I wasn't done yet. I wanted to do more. I wanted to add darker colors to it. I wanted to add some shading and some highlighting. Well, not really add any highlighting, just add some shading. So after I finished the hair, I decided to go back to the skin and go over with the watercolor brush markers that I had. Even though I used regular color pencils for her skin, I decided to go over the skin with the watercolor markers. Otherwise, the whole thing just wouldn't look as good. Because I think the hair turned out to be really cool, but it was gonna bother me if the skin didn't look good. Now, I've had these watercolor brush markers for quite some time. I got them sometime during the pandemic, and I haven't really used them in over 4 or 5 years. This was the first time I pulled them out since probably 2021. Probably the best decision I made when it came to this piece. I wish I would have used this first instead of using regular color pencils to color her skin. The markers really came in clutch with this one. Because in all honesty, I was ready to just give up on this piece and just let it be. So after I got finished with the skin, which looks a lot better, I decided to go over the hair again with some more layers and make the hair a bit darker because the skin was a little bit darker. It looks like she was outside for quite some time because I sure gave her a tan. I also tried to use the markers to cover up the pencil lines from the sketch and cover up some much needed areas, well, areas that needed to be covered up, just so I can fill in the spaces that needed to be filled, especially in the places where the face and hair meet. So once I was finally done with the skin and the hair and everything looked good, what's that word that people like to use nowadays? Yassify? You're never gonna hear me use that word again. I grabbed one of the blue pencils and I shaded the eyes, and I also added color to the tank top that she was wearing. Of course, I also had to take breaks in between coloring to let the ink dry. Well, not necessarily the ink, but the water. I also tried to recolor the necklace a little bit because I did go over it with the marker, but most of the damage was already done. And as a finishing touch, I added white dots to her eyes to give a light reflection. And with that, the picture is done. So to give my final thoughts on the watercolor pencils, I like them a lot and I can't wait to use them again in other projects. But I do regret getting the 36 pencil set. I wish I would have gotten a bigger set, because I could really see myself using these pencils quite a bit. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again in the next video. God bless.